Now we get a chance to look at a very interesting and many people find very difficult remedies problem. Take a look at the call of the question. What remedies, if any, does Cars have against Brown? Discuss. Against Jones? Discuss. Well, it's pretty easy to set up an answer to this question before we even read the facts. For each one of these two lawsuits, Cars versus Brown and Cars versus Jones, we know that the plaintiff is going to have one or more theories of liability, and we're being asked directly about remedies, so we would think naturally of our little short checklist of damages, restitution, and injunctive relief, either in torts or contracts, depending on the facts presented. Well, that was simple enough. We can now go and look at the fact pattern. One thing that we can observe up front is this is a very short question. So if it's an essay, we can be expected to need to find a home for every last detail presented. And if it's a multi-state question, we could see that maybe several questions could be attached to this short, simple fact pattern. So let's take a look at it. In paragraph 1, we meet somebody called Smith. Well, wait a second. Smith is not a party to any of these lawsuits, so we notice that and read on. Smith brings a car into Carson's auto repair shop, that's Cars, and Cars fixes this vehicle for $5,000. The day the work is completed, Smith doesn't show up to pick up the vehicle. The police come, and the police explain that the car was stolen by Smith and that Brown, our first defendant, is the true owner. The police take possession of the vehicle and return it to Brown. Cars hasn't been paid, and Smith has disappeared. Well, let's pause for a moment. We are asked about the liability of Brown as to Cars. So let's think about that for a moment based on paragraph 1. Has Brown committed a tort against Cars? Answer, no. Has Brown breached a contract with Cars? Answer, no. So we scratch our head and move on to paragraph 2. In paragraph 2, we learn that Brown didn't have insurance on the car. A week after he gets the car back, he sells it to Jones. That's our second defendant. And he gets $8,000 for the vehicle, which is the fair market value of the car in its repaired condition. All right, now we know right now that Brown has been unjustly enriched as a result of the repair work that was done on the car that he did not pay for. Then we move on and we find out classic remedies facts. Look carefully and be prepared to do a little bit of accounting work on the information that follows. He takes the $8,000, he deposits it in his bank account. The balance goes up to $22,000. A week after this deposit, he withdraws $20,000 and blows all of it gambling. So now he's only got $2,000 left. A day later, he wins $1,000 in the state lottery, and he deposits that money into his account. No other changes have taken place, and then we get the call of the question again. This is a challenging, difficult question, and a lot of people who actually had to face this question on their bar exam paid a stiff penalty for their lack of preparation. Now, turn the page and take a look at the way that I have chosen to outline an answer to this question, and I think you'll see that once you really think about this question and organize an answer, it isn't really that difficult. This is a question that's more intimidating than difficult. So our first lawsuit is Cars versus Brown, and you'll notice I break the question up into remedies rather than following my standard approach, which would be to have a discussion of the theory of liability up front. Here I project all of those ideas into the analysis which I slavishly organize to be responsive to the question. The question asks about damages. Well, I've got plenty to say about damages. First, we consider the lawsuit of Cars versus Brown. With regard to damages, we see that Brown never had a contract with Cars, and Brown never committed a tort against Cars. So the damages remedy available to Cars doesn't appear to be present. In other words, Cars doesn't have a theory of liability that would justify a damages award against Brown. But the winning theory of liability is a quasi-contractual theory that results in a remedy of restitution. And here we focus not on the damages suffered by the plaintiff, but on the unjust enrichment suffered by the defendant. So we look at Brown and we see that Brown has been unjustly enriched. Now, suppose Brown had not sold this car. Under those circumstances, Brown was unlucky to have his car stolen and lucky to have his car repaired. And under those circumstances, Cars wouldn't be entitled to any remedy against Brown because Brown hadn't done anything wrong. But once Brown sells the vehicle for its fair market value as repaired, at that point he's got money in his pocket that he shouldn't have as a result of the work done by Cars. So we now have to consider our accounting work, and we consider the issues of a constructive trust and an equitable lien. Now realize that a constructive trust is an equitable restitutionary remedy. It isn't a damages remedy, and it isn't an equitable remedy in the way that specific performance or an injunction in torts is an equitable remedy. A constructive trust requires us to examine an identifiable corpus, and then for the court, sitting in the role of a constructive settlor, imposes a constructive trust over that corpus, appoints the defendant to be the trustee, the constructive trustee, and the only duty of that constructive trustee is to turn the corpus over to the plaintiff. That's how it works. But here, Brown doesn't have all of the money that he obtained as a result of the unjust enrichment. He obtained $5,000 unjustly because he sold the car for $8,000, the fair market value as repaired. That would entitle Cars to get the $5,000 back. But we've got a defendant that doesn't have it. To the extent that we can trace the money back through the commingling to identify a corpus that we can say is the same money that ought to belong to the defendant, we'll impose a constructive trust on that money. Here, the lowest intermediate balance was a couple of $1,000s. We'll trace that, we'll establish a constructive trust over it. And we will see that at the time that the defendant replenished the money, potentially we can establish a constructive trust over that money as well. However, it might be more accurate to call what we would impose an equitable lien over that property. So the restitutionary remedy is the central remedy that Cars will seek against Brown, and Cars should be entitled to full relief. We'll be able to give Cars a constructive trust over all of the money that can be traced to the unjust enrichment, and an equitable lien over the rest of that money. So let's consider a couple of other remedies. Replevin is a little tested remedy that's very useful to know about. That's a pre-trial legal remedy where the court will order the defendant to turn property over to the plaintiff. Replevin really isn't available to the plaintiff in this case because the defendant, Brown, no longer is in possession of the property. Similarly, injunctive relief doesn't get Cars anything because at this point there's nothing to enjoin. They can't enjoin the sale of the vehicle because it's already taken place. And as it turns out, it's that sale of the vehicle that entitles Cars to obtain money from this defendant anyway. So the potential for equitable remedies here really is zero. There's no contract to specifically enforce, and there's no tort that can be enjoined by the equitable powers of the court. Still, Cars will be successful against Brown. They'll be able to establish a restitutionary remedy founded in quasi-contract, establishing a constructive trust over all of the money that can be traceable, and making up the difference between that amount and the full amount owed by an equitable lien over other property owned by the defendant that the defendant will have to liquidate and convey the value to the plaintiff. So now we turn to the last lawsuit in the case, Cars versus Jones. And here, again, we see that Jones hasn't done anything wrong at all. Jones has not breached a contract with Cars, and Jones has not committed a tort against Cars. As it turns out, Jones is a classic example of a BFP. He's a bona fide purchaser for value and without notice. And we can establish that conclusively. How do we know that Jones is a bona fide purchaser for value and without notice? Well, he paid the full fair market value of this vehicle as repaired. If this buyer, Jones, had any inkling that Brown had been unjustly enriched by the repair of his vehicle, he wouldn't have agreed to pay fair market value. He might have agreed to split the difference and pay half of what the repaired value would be worth, or some other reduction. But he didn't. Here, Jones paid full value for the vehicle. That proves that he is a BFP. It strongly implies he has no notice of any underlying claim by Cars. So I would find Jones to be a BFP for value. That would cut off the rights of Cars as to Jones and also as to the vehicle. So at the end of the day, Cars will prevail against Brown, will obtain full monetary relief in restitution via a constructive trust and an equitable lien, but Cars has no remedies against Jones because Cars has no valid theory of liability against Jones. Jones is a BFP for value. And that wraps up a consideration of a very straightforward but a very difficult remedies problem.